Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to another exciting edition of your number one talk show, City Talks with Rebuben Abati, on your number one lifestyle station, City 1051 FM. On this show, we talk about stories of political and human interest that affect us as Nigerian citizens and as members of a global human community. Today, we'll be discussing the life and times of Queen Elizabeth II, 1926 to 2022. And to guide us through this, it's a great pleasure to introduce our guest on today's show, Professor and Head of the Mass Communication of Base University in Abuja, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi. Professor Abiodun Adeniyi had his first degree from the Ahmadu Bello University ABU Zaria, after which he worked for the Guardian newspapers Nigeria, covering various beats in Lagos and Abuja for more than a decade. He won the British Chevening Scholarship in 2003 to study international communications at the University of Leeds, England, and then he began his PhD research immediately after his master's degree program at the same university. He was awarded his doctorate degree in communication studies in 2008. For his research on internet and diasporic communication, dispersed Nigerians, and the online mediation of distance, longing, and belonging. The research investigated the intersections between international communication and the construction of identity, the evocation of nationalism, and how transnationalism is played up in the matrix. He used the Nigerian diaspora as a case study. His PhD thesis is one of the few African-centered theses earlier published online by the University of Leeds under the Joint Thesis Project. The project runs in conjunction with the universities of Sheffield and York. Professor Adeniyi returned to his native Nigeria in 2009 after a stint at the Oxford Internet Institute, working as a communications consultant. On the platform of the World Bank Economic Reform and Governance Project at the Bureau of Public Procurement, Presidency, Abuja. As a consultant, he guided the Bureau in the administration of the multi-million-dollar media and communication project over 4.5 years. On the expiration of the contract, he became lead consultant at Whitsource Consults Limited, Abuja, before joining Base University as a senior lecturer in mass communications. He has been visiting professor of communication and multimedia design at the American University of Nigeria, Yola, and an external examiner to many universities. He's also a consultant to a range of organizations. He's a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Communication and Development, and is a program moderator, resource person, public affairs analyst, motivational narrator, author of 2 books, namely Diasporic Communication in the Digital Age and From Newsroom to the Classroom, Notions of Media Theory and Practice in Africa. For leisure, he plays tennis and he swims. If you want to be part of this conversation, you can call us on 070010511051. You can also leave a comment on our WhatsApp line 09099164403 and on our social media accounts at City 1051 on Zoom, Instagram, and Facebook. Well, I would like to welcome, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi to the program. Professor Adeniyi, thank you very much for joining us. Professor Adeniyi, can you hear me?
Thank you, Doc, for the generous introduction. Thank you very much, Doc, for the generous introduction. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, today you and I will be talking about the Queen of England, 1952 to 2022. Her life and times, 1926 to 2022. Born Elizabeth Alexandra Mary, and she became queen in 1952 under very accidental circumstances. Her father was not even supposed to be king, because he was the second son of Queen Mary. But then Edward, King Edward, decided that he would abdicate the throne because of his relationship with Wali Sampson. And that was how his brother, Albert, who later became King George VI, ascended the throne. But King George VI died suddenly in 1952 as a result of lung cancer. He was a chain smoker, and that happened. And his daughter, who had married Prince Philip, a naval officer, was holidaying in a place called Sagana in Kenya. She immediately became queen of the realm. She was 25 years old, and it was a momentous moment in history. Now she died this week, aged 96, leaving behind 4 children, about 15 grandchildren, and leaving the throne as the head of state of 14 countries, 14 other countries apart from the United Kingdom, including Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and Jamaica, and New Papua Guinea. And now, this week, we've seen that transition, how the British respect their monarchy, how they manage their monarchy, and already our son, along the principle of hereditary privilege, of primogeniture, has emerged as a successor, taking the title King Charles III. So it's a new transition in the United Kingdom, in Great Britain.
Yeah.
And I would like to ask you, what do you think of all of this? What are your thoughts about these developments in Great Britain?
All right. Thank you once again, Dr. Abati, for the invitation. You're one person I like to describe as Professor of Journalism Practice for your effective marriage of the town and the gown, and theory and practice. You deserve commendation, and of course, you are a quintessential public intellectual to boot. Well done, and I wish you continual successes in all your efforts in this regard, Doc. So to your question, it's a delight, it's intriguing to examine the life of this great lady, and it just reminds me of what sociologists would like to tell us about how roles are accomplished. And there are 2 major parts to roles accomplishments. One is achievement, and the other one is ascription. When it's about achievement, it talks to the question of you attaining the height through a painstaking efforts, coming from your own careful efforts and endeavors towards achieving your life purposes. It's not biological, it is not natural, you have to work towards it. And of course, when it is ascribed, it's often biological, often natural. And that's the case with traditional heads. That was the case with the queen as well. The role she played for 70 years before she died was ascribed to her, and she has played it, and of course, as she has gone, like all mortals will do, including monarchs. But it reminds me again, Dr. Abati, of what Antony, said of Brutus in the play Julius Caesar. And he said, his life was gentle, and the elements so mixed in him that nature might stand up and say to the world, this was man. So in this case, we are not talking about the queen being a man. We're talking about the queen being an excellent woman. A woman where all the elements were so mixed. And if you recall again what the sociologists have said, it fits very well with what, once more, Shakespeare said in the 12th Night. And of course, the very popular quotes, sometimes attributed to Roosevelt. Shakespeare might be controversial. He might be seen as a plagiarist, somebody who probably didn't write many of the plays attributed to him, but his quotations are legendary. And of course, the death of the queen will replay his remarks in 12th Night, where he said, "Be not afraid of greatness. Some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them." In this case, the queen are two of them. Greatness was trusted upon her, as the case could be. Okay, maybe we could say one of them was trusted upon her, really. And of course, once more, she has come, she has seen, she has conquered. And in the 7 decades that she reigned, she achieved a lot, really, in different regards. If you look at her psychology, it was one of calmness, one of being pliant, one of peace, one of being elevated above the fray, just seeking some kind of bonding across the world, trying to preserve the legacy of our forefathers, the legacy of the nation that she inherited as one of the strongest powers in the world, a very influential power. Of course, if you look at politics, she never was involved in politics directly. She was only a head of state, head of the United Kingdom, and of course, 14 other Commonwealth unions. It was ceremonial, but in being ceremonial, she was also effective because our presences were productive. And if you look at our philosophy as well, it was one of live and let others live. But in doing so, we have to understand the fact that life is ephemeral, life is about peace. And most of the times she sounded pontifical. She reminded me with her pronouncement, always like the Pope will sound. And she did it very well, really. And where else again can we situate the Queen? Our economics was not bad. She reigned in a country that was very influential, one of the strongest economies in the world. Yes, she profited from it in terms of comfort, owning about 6 or so castles, living between them as she pleases. That was what nature bestowed on her. That was what ascription bestowed on her. That was what the nation that she lived in, that she reigned, bestowed on her. But of course, she didn't carry all this on her shoulders. She was always calm, very civil, very cautious, very motherly. And overall, you will see that she did well in her time. She preserved the legacy of her forebears, and expectations are very high that her successor, Prince Charles Philip Arthur George, who has now become King Charles III, will continue with her legacy, like he promised us in this he made yesterday. And of course, today Charles has been formally coronated as the King of England, by the ancestry council. Ceremonies are even still on as we are talking, but these are just processes. It's well known. I think overall, yes, there are questions around the continued relevance of monarchy in the 21st century, but it is what it is. Some of these things are very historical, and sometimes it can be very difficult to alter tradition, except they are very dramatic disruptions. The British monarchy began about the 16th century, and of course, Queen Elizabeth came in more than 1,000 years after the commencement of the British monarchy. Of course, it's something that's going to continue, despite questions around their viability, around their relevance. They remain symbolic. And the corollary I can draw within the African system is that we still have our traditional heads. They are still very useful in their own respect in terms of preservation of our cultures and tradition. And of course, monarchy is not limited to Britain alone, neither is it limited to the African countries, but of course, even in far distant Asia and the Pacific, we'll see the effects of monarchies, we'll see their presences. And of course, some of these things can be very, very effective, not just in symbolism, but sometimes in playing advisory role, to leaders, who take charge of the political leadership of the nations, of societies, of countries in which they belong. So having said that, Doc, I think it's significant that she will be celebrated for a very long time. Nigeria has said between tomorrow and Monday, our flag should be flown at half-mast. And of course, in England too, 7 days celebration has been declared. But I imagine that it's not going to end until after 10 days. Even after those 10 days, it will continue. Heads of governments across the countries or across the world are celebrating her. They are mentioning their names, her name. Even difficult countries that does not share ideologies with the West, I have in mind Russia and China, have also commented on her death. This will continue for a long time, expectedly, predictably, and consistent once more with what Shakespeare has told us about what happens when when prince and princess die. The heavens will blaze forth. And we are seeing it happening in England. The Queen's case is not going to be different because she was a woman in who all the elements were mixed, irrespective of things with the British Empire as it then was, irrespective of the downsides of the United Kingdom. And of course, we need to remember that there's no nation without some downsides. What matters is what they reflect, the ideologies, the ideas they share, that they proclaim, that they pronounce in contemporary times, as the case could be, Dr. Abati.
Well, Professor Adeni, yes, I like your Shakespearean allusions. And the last one from Julius Caesar. When princes die, when ordinary mortals die, there are no comets seen, but the heavens themselves blaze forth the death of princes. That's from Julius Caesar.
Yes.
And it was said of Queen Elizabeth II that when she died, a rainbow appeared in the sky. And some analysts have made big weather out of that, referring to Shakespeare. Do you think that's superstition or it is true in terms of, how princes and princesses, have a divine connection?
Well, interesting, Dr. Abati. I think it's a whole lot of things, really. For believers in superstition, well, they might just draw a parallel between the two. But I also want to believe that when the 21st century age of science, where certain things can actually be manipulated to fall in tandem with expectations, or to reflect the greatness of personalities. She was, some people even see her as godly. And I heard Boris Johnson yesterday saying that she can actually be regarded as Elizabeth the Great, because of her achievements, her accomplishments, and the time she spent, the longest reigning monarch, one of the longest in history, if not the longest actually. So in this regard, we will say that not necessarily close to the Almighty God, no mortal can be, but she was an exemplary woman, that was above all predilections largely, all peccadillos largely. And if there are some kind of elements manifesting to reflect this, we can just, for comfort's sake, in our memories, acknowledge these developments, but we won't necessarily be definitive about them. But of course, in reference to her, in difference to her, it may not also be fair to dissociate some of these occurrences, from her demise.
Well, I don't know about the second Elizabethan age. You remember that we had Elizabeth I, whose reign was described as, the age of Elizabeth, and that was between 1558 and 1603, during the Tudor period in English history. I think time will tell whether we'll be talking about the second Elizabethan age, because clearly Elizabeth II lived in a period of transition from colonial rule to a modernizing period. She was the queen of the period of TikTok, of the internet, of great transitions, even in the modernization of the monarchy in England. But do you think that her son, Charles III, will be able, to step into her shoes effectively beyond hereditary privilege, considering the fact that his personality is slightly different? He likes to talk, but as monarch, Elizabeth II maintained complete political neutrality. She was a stabilizing force. She was, a force for that transition from colony from empire to colony to, the modern age, and she was a strong force of the Commonwealth. But our son is interested. He makes political statements. He's interested in the environment. He likes to say things. Do you think that Charles III will reign in her mother's shadow, or he will be able to maintain the standards established by the mother?
Yeah, thank you, Doc. I think that, first of all, I understand some of the controversies around her legacies. I've heard and read about people saying that there's no point celebrating her, especially people of the African origin, sometimes even people of Asian origin, because of the legacies of colonialism. But of course, it's also fair to acknowledge that, I mean, she came in, into the operations of these of these systems. She wasn't necessarily part of those who began them. If anything, she was part of those who participated, who contributed into the stopping of these practices. She was part of the transition process. From different shades of freedom to freedoms of nations. And of course, over the years, the United Kingdom emerged to be a bastion of the promotion of human rights. They've been at the forefront of promoting human rights, of ensuring that their societies are egalitarian, that societies are responsible to their citizens, and of promoting different kinds of egalitarianism in different sections of the world, sometimes directly through aid, sometimes through direct intervention. I, for one, like exactly acknowledged in your generous introduction, I'm a beneficiary of the generosity of that country through their British Chimney scholarship. And of course, there are a lot more things they do, because of their progress as a very rich, strong country. And sometimes, again, economics have argued that the economy has probably stopped growing. Of course, with that exaggeration, the economy can actually stop growing. Yeah, there will still be different avenues for growth. So if anything, they have grown over the years to let people forget the unpleasant legacies of the past, slavery, colonialism, and all of that. And of course, we're in neo-colonial era, directly or indirectly, which these countries are principally not promoting themselves. We have citizens of other countries joining even to promote these neo-colonial tendencies, even beyond the machinations of the centers, as the case could be. We have seen peripheries aping and idealizing these nations, helping indirectly to ensure their growth through preferring, through plundering of their national resources, and through the transference of these funds to these mother countries. So largely, we may not necessarily continue to blame these mother countries, as the case could be. And of course, Elizabeth II, like all monarchs, she's not going to do anything markedly different from what the government of the day is doing. Her role is just largely ceremonial. And like I said, if you look at her sociology, it has just been around advocating peace, promoting some values, promoting some virtues, promoting some causes, which are all the growth, and development of nations, to the peace, happiness, and prosperity of nations and their peoples. And these things can be reflected in the environment, in culture, in climate change, etc., etc. And these are very, very obvious. Even all our visits to Commonwealth nations, they around, showing that they are there for them. It's about love, it's about peace, it's about Christian harmony, it's about togetherness, and the absence of war, the absence of conflict, even if this cannot be eliminated in the interactions of humans, as the case could be. So I did not see King Charles III doing anything different. Yesterday, he said he acknowledged the greatness of our mother and went ahead to say, yes, she's going to renew those legacies, and she's going to continue from where the mother stopped. Oftentimes maybe we should forget about personal inadequacies or personal errors, or personal lifestyle. There's a sense in which you can differentiate between the idiosyncrasies of persons and their achievements at the level of state. I've seen all these things happening around the world, where people, in terms of their private lives, questions can be asked, but when it comes to achievement at the level of state, at the level of professionalism, they have excelled. So if we just leave that apart, if we leave Prince Charles apart if you take this out of Prince Charles and focus on his potentials, going by what he's been able to do in the last couple of years, of course, we will know the ability to continue from where the mother stopped. Prince Charles was in Nigeria about 2-3 years ago. And of course, he visited some other West African countries. He was saying all he was concerned about was also progress and nation building. And of course, these are the things that we actually need in a globalizing world where life processes and procedures have become largely decentered, where integration is more, where inclusion is more, where you need all units in the global whole, to be progressing so that there won't be disruptions. So that one that is not progressing will not disrupt progress of the other ones through migration, through emigration, or through one nation having to intervene in the affairs of the other through aids, or through direct military intervention. These things can be destructive. So if there's universal progress, of course, even nations across the world that are supposedly prospering will also be at peace. I do not forget, Dr. Abati, if I have to bring this in, if you look at the bulk of migration across the world, it's often to the prosperous nations, mainly to the Western nations that are much more receptive immigrants, and the bottom line for migration is actually economic reasons. Nations that are developing, nations that are underdeveloping, citizens in those countries are looking for greener pastures, therefore they are migrating to the prosperous West. But prosperity can be broadened, expanded, if suppose nations that are in the developing reign, can also be helped to develop, or if they can be more inward looking, they can be more concerned about insourcing and develop themselves such that the world can be a little more egalitarian, and the pressure of the Western societies will be discontinued, so to say. So I see Prince Charles continuing these kinds of preachments, consistent with the disposition, the psychological and sociological disposition of, as the case could be, sir.
Well, Charles III, the first king to have gone to university, BA History, Cambridge. The longest time waiting heir to the throne, son of Queen Elizabeth II. This morning, the Accession Council, consisting of the Privy Council and great ministers and officers of state, officially proclaimed in a symbolic manner, of course, his accession to the throne. But there was something you touched upon, which was the point about reactions from the old empire and how, there is a reflection of mixed reaction to the legacy. In South Africa, the Economic Freedom Fighters, a political party, says they do not mourn Elizabeth II because it's part of the tragedy that befell South Africans and that marred, part of African history. In Australia, Professor Sandy O'Sullivan, an indigenous Australian, an aborigine, said that, look, Elizabeth II cannot be distanced from the evil of colonialism. Well, to the extent that she was an inheritor of that legacy. Also here in Nigeria, we had a Professor Uju Anya, professor of modern languages at modern European languages at the Carnegie Mellon University in the United States. Even before the Queen died, putting out tweets and saying the Queen was responsible, more or less, for the genocide that befell our people. I guess in this regard, she was referring to the Civil War, the Biafran Civil War, and she said she wished that the Queen would die in agony and that she would suffer an excruciating death. And of course, there were responses, including a response from Jeff Bezos of Amazon. But there are some Nigerians also on Twitter who have been saying, why are Nigerians so worried about the death of Queen Elizabeth II? What we were told is that you don't speak ill of the dead. The Queen was head of the Commonwealth, 56 countries, as at the last count. Most of them, part of the old empire. Some of them joined, like Gabon, like Mozambique. They were not originally part of the empire. What do you think of all of this? Do you think that the Queen, upon her death, should be taken up as the author and victim and promoter of the legacy of colonialism, whereas she did a lot to put a positive spin on that critical moment in history? and to build bridges with the former colonies.
Yes, Doc, it's actually very difficult to control difference. In every situation, you see differences, you see variegations, in terms of how people perceive incidences, processes and procedures. And of course, we are seeing this reflected again in reactions to the death of the Queen. And this is not unexpected considering her prime role and the institutions she represents. But of course, I think that we should be epistemic enough, so to say, to differentiate between the Queen as a person and the institution she represents. As a person, I think she has been elevated. She has been very cautious. She's been very civil. She has tried to stay away from some of these countries by even taking practical steps, to mitigate the psychological pains or memories that still linger in the minds of some people. And even within our own community, within our own United Kingdom, we could see how conciliatory she has always been. Of course, there are sections of the system, of the UK system, that are averse to continuing the monarchy, seeing it as irrelevant, seeing them as people who are just feeding fat on taxpayers, given the critical nature of that system. But even in reaction to all that, they've just largely left it system to the side. And of course, largely the system still prefers the continuing reign of the monarchy because it's a historical legacy, like I said earlier. It started from the 16th century, more than 1,000-year-old now, and of course, into it through affliction. So, but her personality, sitting in that position, has been very, very gracious, very magnanimous, largely. But the institution that she even represents, yes, in the past, the institution was one of conquest, and maybe exploitation. If we remember the story of slavery, if you remember the story of colonialism. But the argument can still be made that nations have been freed now, and freed in parentheses. But to what extent will we say that some nations have made use of the freedom that they have enjoyed, from the independence period? Questions can still be asked around how nations have been able to govern themselves, from the time they gained independence. To what extent have they been able to use their independence, to bring about growth and development of their own people? Are they not all, trying to plunder their own resources, as the case could be, trying to be grandizing? We've seen nations prospering. India is prospering, for instance, and to a very large extent, long after colonialism, even though a third or maybe a large portion of the world poor still live there. We have seen Singapore for our own experiences. Yes, they probably didn't witness what we witnessed, but of course, it's not also enough. This is where, for Nigeria, for instance, where after independence, what have we been able to do with our own independence? We still see neocolonial traits amongst our leaders. Are we still going to continue to blame the Queen for this, or the institution that she represents for this? In those days, in African scholarship, Dr. Abati, I know you're also very familiar with this. We had some of excellent writers, Sami, Andre Gondefrank, and I applaud that. I'm trying to argue that underdevelopment have resulted from the fact that the center, have been underdeveloped periphery through exploitation. Narrative has changed now from the periphery underdeveloping the periphery. It has moved from the thinking of people like Walter Rodney, largely accusing the center of underdeveloping the periphery, to the periphery underdeveloping themselves. There are instances in which we could say that resources that have been taken out of this country will have brought about our own development. Nigeria and other African countries, to say, Asian countries as well. But of course, through mismanagement, misapplication, corruption, the absence of transparency, the absence of impunity, and all of that has resulted into the state of our economy as presently is. So, with that background, how much blame should we heap around the Queen and probably the institution she represents? So if you look at her passing, she was exceptional. She did her best, to bring about conciliation, and even the institution she represents, I can argue, has moved away, from those lines of thinking, trying to mitigate the pains from the memories of slavery. And of course, they exist in modern times. How long can we continue to look backwards? How long can we continue to rust missteps? In contemporary, we know what that institution represents. They represent freedom. They represent happiness, justice, and progress for nation. And of course, done things in practical terms, to share their wealth, even if they are not asking people, not to make efforts to develop themselves. So reality is thinking differently. To stop people from thinking the way they want to think. It's the beauty of difference. It's the beauty of discussion. But of course, we also know that freedom comes with some responsibility. I understand that the African culture, the African tradition, does not really encourage us to speak so much evil about the dead because they are no longer around to defend themselves. It's no longer a sign of courage if you attack the dead, because they're just there, they are finished, so to say. Their life is been terminated. So what's left is just for them to rest in, and letting them rest in peace, that we should not be too hateful, in our pronouncements, on their being, because we are all mortals, as the case could be, and our own time will come. And of course, when it comes, we do not want people to be too hot, to be too, to vociferous in the judge us. That's my own take at the level of morality, but overall, we may not prevent expressing their views, but I'm arguing that we should be slightly responsible, Dr. Abati.
Okay, Professor Adeni, at this point, I would like you to just take time out to refresh your internet connection while we take this break. But after the break, we'll open up the lines. I still have another question I would like to ask you, but we'll open up the lines. Let other people be part of this conversation. And if you want to be part of it, you can call us on 07001051. You can also leave a comment on our WhatsApp number 09099164403 and on social media accounts at City 1051 on Zoom, Instagram, and Facebook. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this break. Well, King Charles III, the new sovereign, the new monarch of the United Kingdom. He was 3 years old, between 3 and 4 years, when his mother ascended the throne as Elizabeth II in 1952. He has had to wait the longest time to ascend the throne, and today he is the monarch of Great Britain. Well, in the next few days, he will embark on a tour of the countries that make up Great Britain. He will visit the capitals of Wales, Northern Ireland, and also Scotland, having been proclaimed king. And in the next few days, the Queen will be buried at the Westminster Abbey, St. George's Chapel, where our own father was buried, and our husband's body, Prince Philip, who died last year, will be buried along with her in a chosen place. Truly, this is the end of an era and the beginning of another, and there's been so much talk about the future of the monarchy and also the future of the Commonwealth, which, Queen Elizabeth led, and now that has been handed over to King Charles III. Now, we'll take the calls, and, in the remaining segment of this program, who is going to go first. Hello? Hello?
Hello, good morning, sir.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, Dr. Abati. Yeah, and I agree, Professor Adeni. I like you for the topic, and I really appreciate that. And I hope you write more in your editorial. Yeah. Then, Doctor, I share the same feelings of many Africans and many more people in the world who don't like the royalty. Yeah, because of the past. We are moving away from that now because of time and for the discourse as well. Even some lessons to take from this royalty. Number one, she was selfless. At least to her people, she represented the great virtues of, health assistance and, hospitality to her people. It is here in Africa. How many of our traditional rulers remains with their people? How many of them, even the pain that people go through? She never traveled anywhere. I'm talking about the lessons they take from our life now. Number two, look at our traditional institution. The first time Prince Charles came to Nigeria as the Prince of Wales, now the King, he came to Nigeria and we have to move all New York to Abuja. We have to move the Sultan of Sokoto, then the Obi of Onitsha and the rest. All of them have to gather and meet this same traditional ruler of great business. Equally the human being like them. Have to meet the name. I think this is on Africa. No matter what we look at it, this is on Africa. And I think time has come when our traditional rulers will have to be totally independent. Independence does not really mean do your government or whatever. You want people to protect your own culture, your own tradition. For instance, the king of Abati, they never leave the palace. Anybody wants to see him, we go to meet him there. That is the tradition there. Now, what I want to ask you now, the journalist and the professor, what is going to happen with the rest of criticism and the ranking that is going up right now? Before now, nobody will just say anything against or against whatever the king or the queen said in the past. But today, the press is really writing so much about accountability, so much about things like you have shared. The way things are going now, and as journalists, do you think the job of journalists is not going to be going to be restricted by the power that the show wields? And finally, Africa, we had people who fought against colonialism and the likes of Nkrumah, the Zinc and the rest, Kenneth Kaunda. All of these people fought for independence. Today, are we really independent? African presidents are not independent. If you are independent, how dare you again go for begging for what you call it now? Grants, going to beg for grants for what is it now? Malaria, for what have you? I think it's difficult African continent, and Nigeria must be in this area. I don't feel like it's possible. When we talk about colonialism and slavery, the people who helped these Igbo people, were they not even black people like us? So we should look into ourselves and tell ourselves so that we don't have those slave masters again in our governance like we have them today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure that Professor Adeniyi heard you loud and clear. But on WhatsApp, I have a message here from Akin Ogunlade to everyone. He says it was theorized that there was an orchestrated criminal conspiracy surrounding the death of Dodi Fayed and Princess of Wales Diana, which I missed that again, which the Queen described as a part of Annus Horribilis, a horrible year, with all encomiums and accolades that has now been poured in after the Queen's departure. Don't you think she subtly organized the death of Diana? Because at the time, it was alleged that Diana was already pregnant for Dodi Fayed. You get to hear, quite a lot, in this regard. Okay, those are the two things that have been brought up. Dr. Professor Adeniyi, can you react to these two issues very quickly so that we can take more calls? Hello, Professor Adeniyi.
Very well, Doc. These are things that we hear in public discourses, and of course, they are not out of place. We understand that there are nuances, there are innuendos that could happen. Where we have occurrences like that. Of course, when very important personalities are involved, and especially when those occurrences have implications, for the future of nations. And of course, the UK, for instance, is a very strong, complex nation, bearing binaries, one around monarchy, traditionalism, second one around, modernity. We have modern system of government. Of course, you have a straight ahead, and of course, whatever individuals that are critical in that situation, in that whatever they do, can rub off directly or indirectly on the process, of the sustainability of the states. So it wasn't out of place for us to have insinuations when Dodi and President Diana died, and so many controversies around it, and of course it continued even up to the time of the continued refusal of Mohammed. Of course, he wanted to become British citizen. We read in many cases for a very long time. He was denied until he probably sold Harrods and probably exited that country. I'm not sure if he has left now, but the controversies are continuing, the permutations are continuing. But it's also very, very difficult for us to be definitive, to be arithmetical about those circumstances because it has not been proven. But it will still continue. It will remain at the level of conjectures. But we know that state operations can be very, very complex, and it's very difficult for us to know the truth. Sometimes we may never even know. It just remain at the level of conjectures. States operations are very complex. It is not just in contemporary times. It's also very, very historical, and it makes a lot of meaning. When states are trying to preserve their pride, preserve their heritages, preserve their legacies, and especially when it's about biology. Overall, this will remain a fact because it speaks to the definition of nationhood, the definition of all the part of the subtext of nation building. Nation building is not only in the physical, it's not only in the tangible, it also has to do with the intangibles, and the intangibles matter. The reasons why, for instance, she stood out within a prime minister despite the sophistication. Of course, that one will remain elections, because it's about numbers. Liz Truss had the numbers and she won. And of course, we have to make do with that. That's a fact on the ground. But those will remain at the level of conjectures. These things are realities, But we have to appreciate the United Kingdom too as a cosmopolitan state. It has largely tried, in building building multiculturalism. I know a city in the UK, for instance, Bradford, where about 80% of residents, are people of foreign, maybe Asian origin.
Sorry.
But of course, we know the significance that these so-called foreigners are making in terms of the politics of those nations.
Professor Adeni, we have another caller on the line. Maybe we quickly take that call. Hello?
Okay.
Hello? Hello? Okay. Sorry, Gwen. We lost that call. But quickly, just before we take another call, if there's someone on the line, I wanted to ask you, what's your assessment of the Nigerian reaction to the death of Her Majesty the Queen? Hello?
Hello?
Yes, please go ahead. And please keep it brief.
I'll try.
Yes.
Everybody, you can hear me very well. Yeah, about the Queen, I'm neither here nor there as far as the demise is. It goes to maybe no doubt, but when you consider the fact that Kenyans are not smiling right now, the Malcolm Rebellion comes to mind. South African miners, if I read of a tweet yesterday that it's a case of good riddance, they don't really care that she's dead because they believe one of the diamonds around her crown was as a result of their own blood. Now, the fact that the world is driving her, making her look at she was inside of an empire that was entire, is not worrying them. This African sentiment of we don't speak ill of the dead, it doesn't really count before me because, to be straight, quite notorious. I mean, during the pre-colonial days, and even before independence, it took someone like Winston Churchill to tell them that, look, this colonial business is no longer in place. We should deal with it. That's why most African countries got their independence. Otherwise, they were reluctant to let us go of their clutch. They wanted to hold on to the continent forever. So the for 70 years.
Okay, I get your point. I thank you. I get your point. We're trying to manage time, but the other side of it is that even when these countries became independent, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and all these countries, they became independent in 1949. Ghana got its independence in 1957. Nigeria became independent in 1960. Within the first few years of Elizabeth II ascending the throne, about 15 African countries gained independence. Many years later, what have we done with that independence? Are we going to continue in Africa to blame the colonial past, the descendants of, the colonial masters, and all the way into the future? The opportunities that we have had as Africans, running our own affairs, what have we done with that? Okay, there are many ways to look at this issue. But I come back to you very quickly before we round up. I wanted you to assess the Nigerian reaction from the official side. The president has, issued a statement saying that the history of Nigeria will be incomplete without a reference to Queen Elizabeth II, who visited Nigeria for the first time in 1956, and who also visited a couple of times after that, and who had an outstanding record of having visited all the countries that make up the Commonwealth. Some of them more than once. Canada having the top record, which she visited 22 times in an attempt to build bridges. Now, here in Nigeria, one fellow, I think his name is Garuba Adamu, a politician, recommended that the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, should be named after Queen Elizabeth II. And that drew serious reaction from the Southeast, including the Ohanese Indigo, that reacted and said, no, it's not the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, that you name after Queen Elizabeth II. Go and name Aso Rock after Queen Elizabeth II. What do you think of all of this?
Yeah, very interesting, Doc. First you asked Nigerian reaction. I don't think we have done badly, really. We can't do beyond what we have done. Do not forget their legacy as a former colonial masters, and of course we've had our foreign minister reacting. We had some very influential Nigerians, who participated directly, were directly involved in the management of Commonwealth, reacting. Emeka for instance, came up and spoke, reliving his memories of interacting with the Queen. And of course, the legendary Professor Bola Akinyemi has also spoken. I listened to him on your show, and several of them, including our High Commissioner in the United Kingdom. And do not forget that High Commissioners have always been admitted into the prestigious St. James's Court, where the Ancestry Council, approved the emergence of King Charles. That's a very reputable organization, and of course, they give us due recognition. We're supposed to do that wait, and maybe there are invitations, of course, and I expect that we're going to be invited. I hope to see the president, representing our country at the burial. That's what is expected of us. I agree with your comment, which, of course, I also said several times that we cannot continue to look backwards. We have seen these times of direct plundering and how our own natives, our own indigenes, our own citizens have also helped the continuous growth of these countries, by taking our response to them. What are they going to do in that regard? They have also even been gracious by returning some of them to us. These things can be very, very ridiculous. So what we have to be concerned about is our own internal ego, our own internal values. How do we reorientate ourselves, and be inward looking and use our own resources for the benefit of our people, so that 6 years from now we can say that we have actually progressed. If in the past 6 years we do not have anything to write about as a nation, that's what I think we should. But overall, I think history is moving. History is not waiting for anyone. Nations are moving. Nations are growing, not necessarily looking outwards, blaming. There's no nation that has been completely independent. Do not forget, even the United Kingdom that we're talking about, in historical times, they've had their own back. castles, and so many other castles, and so many other places that are the epitomes of warfare. But they have lived through those times. They have leveraged on their history, and they have converted some of those things into money generating avenues. It remains today as a major tourist destination. How well can we harness our own past? How well, can we look inwards, to prepare development, rather than looking outwards, continuing to blame slavery and colonialism, irrespective of the sad memory, but we cannot overall continue to live in the past, Dr. Abati.
Thank you very much, Professor Abiodun Adeneye. For the past 1 hour, we've been talking about the life and times of Elizabeth II, Queen of England, head of the Commonwealth, head of the Anglican Church, leader of the faith of the Anglican Church, and head of state of 14 other countries, including New Papua Guinea, Jamaica, Canada, and Australia. And now, what we have been discussing is the end of an era and the beginning of another in Great Britain. The transition from Elizabeth II, the longest reigning monarch in British history, now his son, Charles, Prince Charles, as he then was, taking over as King Charles III. Nigeria and Great Britain share great history, culture, relationships, trade, and all of that. But there's the other side of it, about the legacy of colonialism and slavery that many people have also brought up to provide a balanced view of the review of the legacy of Queen Elizabeth II and what she represented. And on both sides, of course, what is important is that, look, no life, is just a single narrative. And one big lesson from all of this is that we are all human beings. Royalty is no protection from mortality. Every living thing will die one day or the other. But you'll be remembered by the kind of impact you were able to make, either in your immediate environment or in the larger community or at a continental global level. But there's no doubt that Elizabeth II made a mark. She loved her job. She served her people with a sense of duty, commitment, dedication. And she was indeed one of the greatest influential figures whose influence spanned across 2 centuries, the 20th century and the 21st century. May she travel well. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Dr. Abiodun Adeneye, for taking time out to join us on the program. And I also like to thank all our callers and those who reach out to us on Zoom and Facebook and other social media platforms. Remember, the conversation does not end here. You can reach out to me personally on my social media account at Abati1990 on Instagram. And also, you can reach out via at City1051 on all social media platforms. For those of you who tuned in late, there's no need to worry. You can visit our YouTube page, City1051, to watch the entire show. And when you do so, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and leave comments. And don't forget to tune in again next week at 12 noon